morning, everyone, and welcome to Ocean Visit Summit 2021, Day 3. You are in the session on Healthy Ocean, Healthy People. Today is going to be very interactive with lots of breakout rooms and discussions. We ask you to please mute your microphones and turn your video off throughout the session. If you have questions during main session time, please put them in the chat, starting with the word question. Here to start the session off today is Louise Gammage.
And welcome to this session on Healthy Oceans, Healthy People, hosted by the EU Africa Ocean Vision satellite campuses. I'm Louise Gammage. I'm a research fellow at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and I'm the Ocean Vision's Africa host and co-lead of the session. I'm joined by Delphine Lobelle from Utrecht University in the Netherlands, who is the Ocean Vision's Europe host. There's a growing awareness that the oceans are critical to human health and well-being, and through this afternoon session, we aim to identify opportunities and levers for promoting healthy oceans, healthy people. We continue a conversation started in session 3A, hosted by the US Ocean Visions team, by taking a closer look at some of the challenges and opportunities related to the intersection of oceans and human health. After this introductory plenary session, where Sabine Pecl from the University of Vienna in Austria will be giving the keynote talk in a couple of minutes, we will move into 3 simultaneous breakouts. The first breakout on ocean plastic solutions is chaired by Delphine Lobelle, who will be joined by Eric van Sibyl, joining us from the Netherlands, Stephanie Wright, who is joining us from the UK, Ziggy Gruber, who is joining us from Belgium, Richmond Kwako from Ghana, George van der Schuyf from South Africa, and Audrey Hasson from France. The second breakout focuses on connecting healthy oceans to healthy human well-being and is chaired by Nina Rivers from the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa and Amanda Schadeberg from Wageningen University in the Netherlands. They are joined by Nadia Dreyer, joining us from Namibia, Dylan McGarry from South Africa, Sabine Pecl from Austria, Kogi Govender joining us from South Africa, Emma McKinley, who's joining us from Wales, and Nomvula Ngozi from South Africa. Our final breakout session on promoting sustainable fisheries is chaired by Marika Norton from the University of Cape Town in South Africa and Jennifer Benkensteiner from the University of Britannia in France. They are joined by Marloes Kraan joining us from the Netherlands, Stuart Norman, who is joining us from South Africa, and Zoe Jacobs, who's joining us from the UK, as well as Päivi Hapasari from Finland. After the breakout sessions, we will reconvene in a closing plenary, where a short summary of the discussions will be presented, before a closing keynote by Alok Jha from The Economist on the importance of science communication for this topic. But first, I have the great pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Sabine Pecl. Sabine is a social psychologist focusing on the human dimensions in environmental issues. She investigates perceptions and behavior change, particularly in the area of protecting marine environments, marine litter, and microplastics. Her projects typically span research and application in interdisciplinary teams, and she has provided science advice and input into policy at European and international levels, always contributing psychological and behavioral science perspectives. She has contributed to 2 microplastics reports with a joint group of experts on the scientific aspects of marine environmental pollution, and has led the Univ funded global stocktake of actions against plastic pollution in 2020. She was co-chair of an interdisciplinary working group that reported to the EU Group of Chief Scientific Advisors. So join me in welcoming Sabine. The floor is yours, Sabine.
Thank you very much, Louise, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. I'm very excited to be part of this session. And I can't see the slides on my screen. Ah, here they are. Excellent. In the short session we have today, in the short presentation, I will focus slightly more on questions than on answers. But my topic is connecting human behaviors and a healthy ocean. Now, to introduce this, next slide, please. I want to refer to work by my great colleague Laura Fleming and her team, who have looked at the interlinks between ocean and human health. And there are many, they are varied. You can see this in the picture here. I know this is a little small to read, but I have highlighted the effect that we see for human health. So coastal communities and their visitors who have access to blue spaces, such as the ocean environment, for example, they see a range of benefits for mental health. They also get physical activity. They receive more vitamin D if they're out in the coastal environment. And these things are linked to longer, healthier lives. There are also some negative sides, for example, stings and poisoning in some marine environments, and they might be leading to increased mortality and morbidity. So that's the human health, one example. Next, please. There are also effects, obviously, regarding ocean health. So if we take the example of the marine sector, shipping and fisheries and aquaculture, for example, we know they use plastic materials. They are contributing to plastics in the ocean, in the marine environments. That has a range of negative effects. It leads to the ocean ending up as a waste sink. It impacts species and habitats. So these things are negative. And next, please. To bring it back and connecting it to human health, we also know that access to blue space, when people visit the blue environments, this leads to plastics as well. So this is just illustrating that indeed it's a tangled net of various interconnections, lots of interactions between oceans and human health that we're looking at here. Next, please. I want to highlight one factor in particular, which is, we believe, a really core factor influencing these relationships. It's actually nature connectedness that has seen quite a lot of research. I have called it ocean connectedness here, but the research is on nature connectedness very broadly. So it's illustrated here with a boy looking at the ocean. It describes an emotional connection, feeling part of the ocean. It's also linked to activities by the seaside. Here you see someone riding a horse, other people sitting and looking at the ocean. And it's thought to be a really important factor because it's correlated with visits and exposure. People high in ocean connectedness are more likely to go to visit these environments. It's also linked to well-being and to pro-environmental behavior. So again, we have this interesting link between different factors that are all important for ocean and human health. So I wanted to emphasize this one factor. It's an important factor for research, and especially if the findings from nature connectedness are shown to replicate for ocean connectedness specifically. You can also see in this picture on the right some illustration of waste, of rubbish. You can see some small bits of plastics, perhaps, if your screen is not too small. And next, please. I want to ask if plastic pollution is overrated, if it's overweighted in the public discourse, if we're too worried about it. This is a big question in all the meetings I go to. Do people worry too much about plastic pollution? Here's another great piece of work by the same graphic illustrator, Will Stahl-Timmings, who's visualizing the pollution berg with plastic at the top, but also all the other things that we're worried about, from mercury to pesticides to manufactured chemicals. But it remains a fact that plastic receives by far the most attention. So the question is this warranted? And how much attention is a good amount of attention? This focuses on ocean pollution, all the different environmental factors. We've also got a much bigger picture of climate change, overfishing, biodiversity. And then when you think from a people perspective, you also have people worrying about their jobs, their health, so quite far away from the ocean. Where's the good balance? What's the right amount of attention? And next, please, I want to say something briefly. I'm a social scientist. I'm interested in why people are concerned. Why are people so worried about plastic? There's a literature on risk perception that has also now been applied to plastic. And it's the case that people are more worried about technical rather than natural hazards. So for example, I don't know, a natural disaster or something, it's really, really bad. But in the bigger scheme, people don't worry about it so much because in their mind, it's part of nature. whereas plastics very clearly is unnatural, it's plastic, it's artificial, and that is connected to higher concern. Risks in the media of plastic are often mentioning vulnerable people like babies. There was a story about plastic in the placenta. That's also linked to higher concern. And increasingly, there are exposure pathways of concern. So in food, we've seen a lot of coverage. Through air, this is the most recent one. And these are things that people worry greatly about. We know that if there are large numbers of people exposed, that leads to greater concern. And we hear all the time, plastic is everywhere. Wherever we look, there's plastic. There's a lack of controllability that people feel. They can't control plastic in their food, in the air. It's also correlated with higher concern. And there is some uncertainty, some lack of knowledge, for example, in the area of micro and nanoplastics, which also is linked to higher concern. And that's a cluster of factors that we would say can lead to social amplification of risk, where perhaps the risk is of more concern to the general public in the media than it is to scientists at a particular point in time. So these processes are important and we need to think about those. Talking about the right kind of evidence and this discourse we're seeing. Next, please. Louise mentioned earlier, I was part of some policy reports. For example, SAPEA, this was for the chief scientific advisors in the EU. I was the co-chair for the social and behavioral sciences. And just as an example, this was an evidence review report. The conclusion was the best available evidence suggests that microplastics and nanoplastics do not pose a widespread risk to humans or the environment. We qualified this. We said there are some pockets where the evidence is good, but that evidence is limited and it could change. So that's the message we put out to policymakers. It was published, there was a lot of dissemination. And it's interesting that there was quite a response from the scientific community. For example, a year later, some good colleagues of ours, we know them very well, published a commentary piece saying, where's the evidence that human exposure to microplastics is safe? This is not something we can answer easily. And we had to respond to this again. So it's interesting to see if you write an evidence review report, you rely on what's published, what's out there, but not everyone agrees with this. So it leads to my question, what should we do in the context of the precautionary principle, where there are substantial challenges to the science needed? In the case of nanoplastics, we don't have good methods at the moment to establish this. In the case where policymakers are asking for rapid input, there is public concern, industry is watching us very closely, there are economic implications. How do we deal with this situation? We took the stance that we can only provide what we find in the literature and we shouldn't make claims beyond that, but that was clearly not what other scientists thought was a right approach. So, given that even the nature of scientific evidence is debated, and we have this public concern, I want to briefly talk about factors that influence decisions and actions. So next, please. We're seeing a system of plastic that's on the left-hand side, just schematically illustrated. And in this system, you have decisions and behaviors at each node, each sector, each decision maker. And I just want to very briefly refer to the social and behavioral sciences literature, where we see many, many factors influencing decisions and behavior. And what's interesting, I think, is that it's not necessarily information, knowledge, hard facts. I often hear people say, we just need to tell people the facts, the information, and that's not the key thing that influences decisions. There are all these other ones that I don't have time to talk about, but I'm sure you can have a quick glance at these. So we need to consider these when we talk about the system of plastics in society. And next, please. I also want to briefly refer to this work we were asked to do by Univ, which is a similar idea. We need to know what's happening, what are the actions that people take around the world, what are governments doing, what are big major groups doing. So we were tasked by the UN Environment Programme to do a snapshot of action at one point in time to get an overview. And this is all the submissions we received. I want to point out two things we found. We were asked to classify actions in 4 different categories. You can see those on the right-hand side: legislative, working with people, technology and processes, and monitoring. And we found most of the actions that were reported to us were classified as working with people. So again, just a little reminder that it's key that we think about the human dimension and what it can achieve. The other interesting thing we found was, perhaps not unsurprisingly, there were still a lot of end-of-pipe actions. We find increasingly actions that start earlier in the process, but we still were surprised that it's end-of-pipe cleanup actions that is a great focus. And then the final slide of the sort of core slides I wanted to show you, next please, is a reminder that, I don't know, I think many of us are still working, particularly in the global north or broader in the industrialized and the wealthier countries. I know it's not true of everyone, but certainly in social sciences, I can say we're guilty of this. And this is a project I'm involved with partners in Southeast Asia, where we look at sustainable marine management. It's interdisciplinary, it's very much in co-creation. We're listening to each other. And I think that's super important that we go beyond the weird samples, as we call them, westernized, educated, industrialized, rich countries. And I'm learning so much in this project, and it's so much fun as well to really challenge your thinking that you perhaps have done in the past. So final slide, a few key messages. Ocean health and human health are enormously intertwined. We need to bear this in mind. We can't think in silos. We can't just focus on the small questions. People are greatly concerned about plastic pollution. I think everyone knows this now, but still it's worth saying. So where does that sit within other threats to the marine environment? How do we deal with this lack of evidence? I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this, because it stumped us and we're still working on these questions. We should look to psychological and social processes because they can explain concern and behavior. We can also use them in interventions to trigger different behavior. And we need to understand and evaluate the effects of actions at all levels. We asked in the Univ work, we asked how are these things evaluated and what's the nature of the evaluation. And we found there is a good level of evaluation, but they don't always ask the right questions. For example, they might measure how much money is invested rather than looking what's achieved with the action. And I think that's an important difference. And that should also include potential side effects and co-benefits, so things that might happen. And we need to work together. And the final slide is just a thanks to the great team I'm working with and I'm learning so much from. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sabine, for that really interesting talk. I'm sure there are many of you with many questions. Unfortunately, we don't have time to deal with it now. Sabine will be taking part in one of the breakout sessions, but I would like to invite you just to post any questions that you do have in the chat, and then Sabine, maybe if there is anything, if you can have a look and see if you can answer it there. But thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. We're now going to proceed to the 3 breakout sessions, which will take place simultaneously. The session is going to start off with short presentations from all the panelists before we move to an interactive panel discussion where the audience will be able to interact with the panelists and the topic using virtual whiteboards. And we've just prepared a short video for you just to give you a little bit of an idea of how to use these whiteboards. Okay.
Hello, I'm going to briefly explain to you how to use the virtual whiteboard to ask questions or make comments during the interactive panel discussions. Once you enter the Zoom breakout room of your choice, you will receive a link in the chat to open a web page that looks like this. In the middle, you will see all the session information, and on the right is where you can provide your input. You can zoom in and out of your boards using these functions bottom right. And you can also move left and right and up and down just to navigate around the board. And if you get very lost, moving far away from where the board is, then you can use this fit to screen function here, and you'll come back to this main view. You will see that there are these different columns, and the first column is to ask questions to the panelists. So once you are watching their pre-recorded videos, then you can select one of these yellow sticky notes, drag it under that column, double click, and write your question. It is important to write the name of the panelist that you're addressing it to, and if you would like, you can also add your name at the end, or you can remain anonymous, it's up to you. If there is a comment that you like, then please do add an emoji, add a thumbs up, so that we as the chairs know which one of the comments we should address first. The open discussion is then going to move to these 3 questions, where we will ask the panelists to answer the questions, and then we will also ask you as the participants to answer them too. So the same thing happens, you simply just take one of the blue post-its this time and drag them under the columns that you are answering. You will get some time at the beginning of the breakouts to test this out, test out the sticky notes, where you can actually introduce yourselves. So you can see that I made an example here, and you can do the same thing, writing down your affiliation and what you work on. Finally, you will also see a function up here that says hide collaborators cursors. So you'll see that with a lot of people on a board, you'll see all the names moving around. And so that can get quite distracting, and you can hide them here. And that's it. We hope that you have a great breakout discussion. And thanks for joining.
Great, thank you, Delphine. We're now going to activate the breakout rooms. You can join a room by selecting the breakout room icon that will appear at the bottom right of your screen. And then by joining the session of your choice, they will have short descriptions there or short names there. If you have any troubles joining a breakout room, please indicate this in the chat so that the technical team can assist you. There will be somebody in the main room the whole time, so you can deal with it. Thank you very much, and enjoy the breakout sessions.
So should we get onto these summaries of our breakouts? I have to say that we had an incredible panel discussion, and it was really very interesting to have all of these people from different sectors. So we really had people from across Europe and Africa, and they were all looking at this ocean plastic solution issue, or this conversation in very different angles. So it was very interesting to have everyone in the same room. So firstly, for example, for the physical oceanographers like Eric van Sabeel, who was on our panel, it's really important to show where the plastic can actually end up, and so that we can know where the actual cleanups, where the most effort for the cleanups can be focused. So the latest estimates show that actually around 50% of the plastic can end up on the beaches. So beach cleanups are actually a very interesting way of and efficient way of cleaning up what is already in the ocean. And so these beach cleanups are actually part of a solution that another of our panelists, Richmond Kwarku, who is in Plastic Punch in Ghana, they raise awareness in local communities through different activities. And so it actually shows that, the work that they're doing is a lot more valuable and efficient than maybe previously thought. Then one of our other panelists from Pristine Earth Collective, who works on the Litter Boom project, showed that, for the plastic that is in the rivers, preventing the plastic from even reaching the oceans and the beaches is really a very effective way of preventing it from reaching the oceans. And we were also talking about the fact that these low-tech, cheap open source technologies could actually be scaled on, scaled globally, and these are some of the solutions that could actually help on a large scale. So then we also mentioned on the human health side of things. So we had a human health scientist, Stephanie Wright. She's really showing one of the communities that have a huge impact in this story is really to show the scientific evidence and understanding of effects of micro and nanoplastic on human health. And we really know that as soon as these issues can actually affect humans and their health, then this is when you will really get these policy makers that will really come to the conversation with more urgency. And finally, talking about policymakers, we had a former European Commission officer with us, Sigi Gruber, and she shared some of the work that they're doing in a new project to get the Mediterranean plastic free. And we had a very interesting discussion with Audrey Hasson, who's the early career ocean professional representative in our group. And we were really talking about the fact that we could create this intergenerational network. So, really trying to see those that have maybe been around for longer and have more experience in this field, and definitely in the policy making, for example, to get this, to share ideas between the early career professionals as well as the more experienced professionals. So this is a very kind of innovative idea that I myself had definitely not thought about. For Ocean Visions, we're thinking about different sectors, different regions, but really different generations is a whole different story too. So that was a very interesting point to end on. That's my summary.
Thanks, Delphine. Okay, great. Yeah, we were session 2 speaking about the connecting healthy oceans to human well-being, and we had some really interesting discussions and presentations as well. One from Dylan McGarry talking about amphitheatre and about his methodology of looking at different knowledge systems around South Africa, particularly local indigenous knowledge systems linked to the ocean. And just one of the things that really stood out to me was this idea of trauma in South Africa. So we had a lot of our speakers were from South Africa, and then one presenter from Namibia. So just talking about this idea of trauma and how people have been, their lack of access to the ocean, and what the ocean has meant to them in the past, and how that has changed now these days, and being able to tell those stories and how important it is to be able to, for those voices to be heard and then action to be taken. So really beautiful stuff there. Then we heard from Nordea Dreyer, who is from Namibia and working alongside his wife with seal rescue. And a lot of, in 2020, they rescued 600 seals, and now just as seal season is opening, rescued 100 already, and mostly from ocean plastics. And just, he spoke about, the fact that they're just, at the end of the problem, and it's not really a solution, and the fact that they need to draw in industries and be able to talk to industries about, who are actually producing this plastic, and also the need for education around this problem of plastic pollution. We also heard from Kogi Governor from the South African Environmental Observation Network, and she really spoke about the marine program that SAON is doing a lot with schools in South Africa. And learners are learning from the chemical, biological, physical side. And then just linked to that, our discussion after that spoke a lot about the need for social scientists, and the need to also be able to tell youth and school children that it's not only about being marine biologists, but also about being an anthropologist or a journalist. But also Sabine, who spoke next, spoke about plastic pollution. She also just said it's we can't just dump these problems at the feet of youth and say, well, these are what the generations have done in the past. Go ahead and fix it now, go forth. So I think that was something that really was important. And then Sabine, she spoke to us a little bit more about plastic pollution, and just the uncertainty and lack of evidence there is around the messages that are coming out there. And then Emma McKinley from Cardiff spoke about the redefinition of coastal communities and the fact that it's all of us, and it's not we're not homogenous. And she also really reflected on the fact that one thing that stood out to me was we shouldn't really call it ocean literacy, we should call it ocean connectedness. And I really do agree that there is some distance when we call it literacy. And then our ECOP member, Nomvula, she spoke to us a lot about also the early career scientists, talking about the importance of Indigenous and local knowledge. And we just had a really, really good conversation about the need for social scientists and natural scientists to come together, and the fact that social scientists really need a chance to catch up to the natural scientists in terms of, you know, how much time they've had in the sector and in this field, and just about how we need to bring human rights and justice and environmental justice together. So there was a lot, and it was a beautiful conversation. So thank you. Yeah.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm doing a quick summary of session 3, which was really focusing on solutions towards sustainability in fisheries. So we had Malu's talk, which spoke about sustainable fisheries and can only be achieved if the social cultural importance of fisheries is considered. So we really need to quantify or investigate the social and cultural identity and their contributions to food security and well-being. You know, how it's being a fisher, identifying fisher is not only a job that you do, but it expands itself into so many other areas of your life and of your community. We had Stuart talking about Catfish and Observer program, and talking about the importance of a supportive observer program to ensure fisheries compliance, but also, and not the same thing, which was part of our discussion, so observe fisheries compliance, but also collecting accurate fisheries data. And how these two are not always the same thing, but both are important, and how, you know, this could be something that is further strengthened and supported. Zoe had a great talk on West Indian Ocean fisheries, talking about how sustainable fisheries rely directly on capacity development, enhanced research capability, and an increased engagement at all levels across all disciplines, which was something that was really picked up in the panel discussion frequently. And Pivy spoke about how sustainable fisheries require an integrated governance approach. So really looking at it from the governance angle, particularly across policy sectors. So even a small amount of shared information about plans or strategies can enhance the implementation of ecosystem-based fisheries management. So looking at the fishery sectors, but also sectors within governance, and how we could better collaborate between them. So some of our summary points of the panel discussion, I mean, the key words were very much collaboration, cooperation, diplomacy to a degree. It was also an interesting theme of, you know, hidden stories, hidden data, hidden narratives, and how important it is to bring what's hidden to the front. But of course, then how do we do that in our various disciplines and between our various disciplines? So it's about interdisciplinarity, it's about inter-organizational. So whether we're talking about the fisheries industry, or we're talking about, you know, University of Cape Town and, you know, the fisheries branch in the local South African government, or whatever the case may be. So to really look at beyond just working between the disciplines, right, to beyond these other sectors, but who are we identifying as groups? So also very much looking at the mismatches. So the what, we were looking at some of the what needs to be looked at as the mismatches about what is going on in the sea and what is happening on the governance side, issues of scale, issues of sort of, you know, what's happening on land and can that be applied to the ocean, but also can what's happening in the north and fairly stable governance systems be applied or spoken about in places in the world where that stability can't be taken for granted. There always collaboration, linking up social scientists with natural scientists, you know, the usefulness of anthropologists in the space, and and other social scientists. And then also thinking about who's been left out, right? Who would we like to include more in this conversation? So thinking broader than just fishers. So not only the people involved in the fishing industry, but not actively fishing. So processors, sellers, you know, everyone along the value chain, everyone along the value chain of governance, you know, the tech industry and how some of the new technology that I won't even know about that exists out there, how that could be better utilized to really work collectively towards sustainability, which is an ever sort of, you know, it's a journey, it's not a destination. And also the wider public, right? The non-fishing public who also, or the public who is not involved in the governance or act or even necessarily the eating or marketing of fish, right? Let's consider the public sphere also as invested in the blue space, as very much, you know, equity stakeholders in the oceans, whether they consider themselves to be fishers or recreational fishers or beach walkers, whatever the case may be. But keywords, I think, across all of this, from the sounds of it, is very much collaboration, cooperation, and diplomacy.
Thank you so much, Nina and Marika. I really wish I could have been in all three at the same time, because it sounds like you guys had incredible conversations too. So yeah, thank you so much to all of our panelists, to all of our speakers. Before we end off, we have a closing keynote for you. So it's my huge pleasure to introduce to you Allard. Allard is a science correspondent for The Economist, writing on everything from cosmology to particle physics and stem cells to climate change. Before that, he was a science correspondent for ITN as The Guardian, covering daily news and current affairs for more than a decade. He has also written and presented multiple TV and radio documentary series for the BBC. In 2018, he spent a year as a Wellcome Fellow, developing new storytelling formats for complex topics. He has reported from all over the world, including live from Antarctica, and is also the author of 3 popular science books, including The Water Book. Thank you so much, Allard, for being with us. It's really an honor for you to be here, and please take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Delphine, and it really is a pleasure to sort of have this chance to talk to you all. I've been asked to sort of talk to you about communication and why it's kind of what the power of it can be. I don't think I need to persuade you from listening to the summaries you just your panel members have given. I don't think I need to persuade you that telling interesting stories to people and communicating and connecting with people beyond your specialisms is incredibly important. So I thought I would just share with you some things I've learned in my time trying to talk about complicated, sometimes difficult things, often science, how to talk about those things with people who maybe are outside that world and how to make them care about it. So I've put together a sort of SciComm do's and don'ts list, and I just wanted to share it with you. I call it my SciComm do's and don'ts, but the more real title I would give it is something like how to avoid boring people, because that's the fundamental thing that I try and do all the time. I try to find interesting stories out and I want to tell people about them. And the key thing to do when it comes to talking to the public or anyone outside your field, I would say, is that you want to keep them interested, and that means you want to sort of avoid boring them. So here's some things you should do in a way to connect with people and to make them listen to what you're saying and appreciate what you're saying. First of all, I think it's really important that you identify what your purpose is. Is your purpose to summarize your work? Is it to spread it as widely as possible? Is it just to explain it to peers? These are all valid reasons to talk about your work. But once you've identified that purpose, it's important to understand the difference between them all. And what I'm trying to get at in this is because the different ways you do these things identify which audience you're speaking to, and then your audience, when you've identified them, are going to determine how you speak about things. It determines the words you use. It determines how much interest you already know about them. If you've got to identify your audience, and that it comes from identifying what you're trying to do. For me, I do what I do because I find it interesting. I find that science is fascinating, and I find that I like learning about things that other people have just discovered in the world for the first time. And I also do it because I think that it's important that the wider public, people who fund science, people who are the beneficiaries of it, or maybe wittingly or unwittingly, by knowing more about the scientific world, it allows them to make better decisions about their own life. And so that's my purpose. So once you've identified that, you have to think about how you communicate. Now, we've heard this already in some of the things we've heard in the panel discussions just now, but when I write something or make a TV program or radio program or whatever else, my intention is for that thing to be consumed in some way, whether it's read or watched or listened to. I want people to consume it. I don't write it just for myself. I don't write it because I think I'm clever and I want to just prove to myself I can do it. I want someone to just have the idea in my head. I want to take an idea and put it into people's heads. Otherwise, there's no point. But to do that, of course, you have to make people interested. And that involves, first of all, taking yourself out of the way. Sometimes we learn things and we think everyone around us must know all these things in every exquisite detail. And so therefore I'm going to take them on exactly the same journey I went on to get to this point, to understand something. But in fact, that sometimes it's just good to just allow people to follow a story, to sort of be intrigued by what you're saying. And being intriguing means you don't have to say everything about something. It means leaving gaps. It means allowing people to join the dots sometimes. Don't put roadblocks up where people will stop reading. One of my former editors at The Guardian once said to me that every single paragraph you write has to be compelling, because people will be reading it on a train somewhere, and they'll be looking for any opportunity to just skip to the next story. So if you give them one by making it too complicated to understand, or using a word they don't get, or making something a bit weird, then they'll just skip to the next one. So you're competing for their attention. So the next thing I would say is that leads me on to the most important part of communications altogether, which is editing. What I mean by that is that you've got lots of ideas in your head. You know who you're going to talk to, and you put all this stuff down on paper maybe. You think, well, here's all the things I want to say to people. Well, do you think, well, okay, look, I can't tell them everything. So what do I leave out? What are the most important bits? The way you can edit usefully, I find, is by talking to other people. You maybe do a draft of something, or you think of some ideas, or you try it out on someone first. You say to somebody, here's some things I want to talk about, and you look at what they respond to. And then that gives you some sense of the kinds of things you might want to include in the story or whatever piece of communication you're doing. So writing, I think it's fair to say, is mainly rewriting. The first bit, when you just collect all the information together and write, get it all down on paper and all of that will always be rubbish. The first draft of everything is rubbish. It's the rewriting where the real messaging comes through, is where the real sort of story gets told. And then once you've done that rewriting, sleep on it, and then do it all over again the next day. Rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite again. I like to send things I've done to other people to see what they think. Not always, obviously sometimes the timing doesn't work, but if you've got the time, send it to someone you trust, someone who doesn't understand your area of science, someone who doesn't understand any science at all. And then take the comments they make seriously. So people who are very close to a subject, and I include myself in this, by the way, when they write about something or want to make a radio program about something or whatever, they want to put all the information that they think is important. And then when they're told, oh, I don't find this bit interesting, or when they're told, I didn't understand this really complicated word, you might get a bit defensive. No, this is a really important word. This is a really important bit of this story. Listen to what your audience is telling you. If they're telling you they're not interested in that bit, maybe that's something to take seriously. This is another version of the editing I'm going to tell you now, which is that don't exhaust people. Don't give them so much information that at the end of it, they're thinking, oh, when's this going to end? When's this going to end? You want to leave people with a little bit of hunger at the end of a message, or at the end of a piece of article writing, or at the end of a speech. You want to make them think, oh, I could do with a bit more of this information. I could do with a bit more of this idea. And think about the best films you've watched. Think about the best novels you've read. Once you finish them, you think, oh, I want to start reading that all over again. Or you think to yourself, I wonder what that little bit of that film was. Did that really happen in real life? And you go off and find out all sorts of information about it yourself. That's of what's often called the knowledge gap. If you leave things out in strategic ways, it means that people will go off to find stuff themselves. And once they're going to find stuff out, then they will stop at nothing to find out what they want to find out. And I think that that's a really good way of getting the people interested and hooked, which I think is actually really underplayed. And just another version of that is that, just leave out the bits that no one reads. You've all seen papers and articles and things where basically you see a big block dense bit of text, and you think, oh, I'll just skip that bit. It doesn't look interesting. Do that to your text. Go through and see what you don't read, and just skip it out. A couple of things not to do. They're kind of the inverse of what I've just talked about, but it's worth outlining. Don't assume that anyone is interested in what you're about to tell them. You've got to earn their time. You've got to earn their respect. You've got to earn their attention. And that means putting work into how you present the message you're giving them. Don't use jargon. This is especially important for people writing about science, especially important people writing about science for members of the public. No one's ever going to complain that you've made something too easy to understand. And it's very easy to slip into jargon and turn people off, make them feel like they need to work hard to understand you. And I feel like you should make it easy for people to understand what you're saying. Be as conversational as you can. I mean, lots of scientists talk in the passive voice in papers. I know that's less of a trend now, but I see it a lot still. So I would always suggest, write as you would say something. Don't write as if you're writing for your professor who's really needs to be impressed. Just write as if you would, as you speak, and the rhythms are much more natural that way. I, in my writing, use a lot of metaphors to explain complicated topics, and you should do that too. You should find ways of bringing abstract or mathematical concepts or very large concepts that are too big to understand, bring them into some sort of metaphor that people can sort of immediately get at. But be careful, because you can overuse metaphors, you can mix them, and it will sound awful. So just, use them sparingly, but they're very, very good. Don't include everything is something that is the inverse of what I said at the end of my things to do. It really can, but I can't reiterate it enough, which is that even when I've done a piece of research for an article, it might have taken me months to research something, and I've got hundreds of thousands of words of interviews or notes or whatever, and I have to write a 2,000-word article. Now, clearly, technically, I have to sort of get rid of most of it, but it's really painful. But at the end, you'll thank yourself, because someone's more likely to get to an end of a 2,000-word article than they are to go through 100,000 words of everything. You know this, of course, but just remember that you're not writing a full data set scientific paper. What you're writing is something that will slip in easily into someone's mind in the middle of a million other things that they're doing, but will also leave them with a bit of wonder, with a little bit of information they've not had before, with some wow factor. And the very final thing is to not insult your reader. Now, this sounds obvious. Don't insult your reader. And by this, I don't mean call them names or something. What I mean is that, you should never overestimate someone's knowledge, but never underestimate their intelligence. I believe that anyone can understand anything if it's explained to them and they're taken through it. But lots of people in the world just haven't had the same education, the same chances to study something for a long time that you have or I have. And so I'm perfectly willing to believe that they'll understand it if I just take them through all the steps. And you can take them through all the steps and make people feel in awe of something and understand things by following some of the things I've said, which is to make things simple, to not make people feel stupid by using all the complicated words and everything that sort of displaces them from the meaning of the text. So those are my very quick do's and don'ts. And I think that if you were to follow a good proportion of them, you'll make yourself much, much more understandable. You'll find that the things that you want to tell people actually get through to people because they'll be listening to you or reading you to the end of whatever you want to say. The more of these that you ignore, I find, the less likely people are to just give you the attention. And then you might have written something amazing, but no one's going to read it. You might have produced something, produced a great speech, but no one's going to listen to it. The trick is to get people to listen And that's when they'll get your message. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Allard. These are really important points of the do's and don'ts that scientists should be really aware of. We wanted to give all of you participants a little taste of this really important component, actually, of what we're talking about today. So really tackling all of these ocean challenges and trying to get the citizens involved, right? So science communication is really a key part of what we're doing. We need to get these key messages out beyond the scientific community, so even beyond just this cross collaboration that we've been working on today, even just between these different sectors. Once we've done that actual building of this trust and this knowledge exchange, it's actually bringing those key points out to the citizens and to the rest of the public in general. So today we have spoken about ocean plastic solutions, connecting healthy oceans to human well-being, and promoting sustainable fisheries. So it's really important that apart from these workshops, we really think about science communication. So thank you so much, Allard, again, for all of these really interesting points and trying to really go beyond and tackle this ocean literacy, collaboration, connectivity, all these points that came up in these summaries of our breakouts. So thank you very much. And to wrap up, Louise and I would firstly like to thank Ocean Visions for providing this platform to co-host this session on Healthy Ocean, Healthy People. We're really grateful for this opportunity. We had 16 panelists in this session, and we also had a really wide range of people from different sectors and different regions. So thank you so much for joining. Your input was super valuable. In my breakout, for example, I really enjoyed that session. It was really, there was such interesting points that came up. And we would also like to, Louise and I would like to thank the co-chairs for being fabulous team players, working so hard to put all these sessions together. So Jennifer, Nina, Marika, and Amanda, thank you so much. And lastly, we would also like to thank all you participants. These discussions couldn't come together if you wouldn't join. So thank you so much for joining today. We hope that they've been very fruitful discussions and that you've enjoyed it. And we would definitely like to keep this going. So I see that Fio is in the chat, and Fiorenza was the chair for the US version of this session. And we've already discussed about having working groups to try to keep these conversations going beyond the summit. So keep your eyes and your ears peeled for those, and we will be in contact soon about more of these kind of sessions. So thanks again. And from Louise and I, we would just like to say goodbye.